Hi, fourth graders. This is your math e-learning lesson for Monday, May the 11th. Today's lesson is called Simplifying Fractions, and it's lesson 132. So simplifying fractions means writing the fraction answers in its simplest forms. For example, when you have a fraction and we say, oh, you need to reduce that. When you reduce it, if you've reduced it as far as you can possibly reduce it, then we say that it's written in its simplest form. So today we're going to look at, as I said, lesson 132. And you'll see down at the bottom of the page it talks about improper fractions and fractions. And what it tells us is that improper fractions, when you get an answer, for example, if you're adding or you're subtracting mixed numbers, or you're adding, subtracting fractions, whatever it might be, that when you do that and you end up with an answer that is an improper fraction, remember that means the numerator is larger than the denominator. So if you end up with an improper fraction, you have to simplify that, and you would simplify that by changing it either into a mixed number or a whole number. So just quickly, for example, let's say you had 12/6. So if you had 12/6 as your improper fraction, then you think of it as a division problem. 12 divided by 6 equals 2. So there you have where you've changed your improper fraction to a whole number. Now, if it was something like, let's say, 12/5, okay? 12/5 is an improper fraction. You would think of it as a division problem. 12 divided by 5 would be 2 with the remainder of 2. So you would actually be changing 12/5 into 2 and 2/5, and that would be the mixed number. So anytime you end up with an improper fraction, you can't leave it that way. Okay, you cannot leave it that way. And so you have to do the division, and when you do the division, sometimes you'll end up like this with a mixed number, sometimes it will go evenly, and you'll end up with a whole number. And then, of course, anytime you have an answer that is a fraction, so let's say you had 3/9 as your answer, you need to make sure that you reduce it. So with 3/9, you know that you're going to divide both the numerator and the denominator by 3, and 3 divided by 3 is 1, and 9 divided by 3 is 3, 1/3. And then if you look at 1/3, well, there's nothing further that you can reduce it to. Because remember that when you reduce, you are dividing. And whatever you divide the numerator by, you must divide the denominator by as well. So in 1/3, there's no one number that you can divide both the numerator and the denominator by. So 1/3 is reduced. So that's our bottom line here in today's lesson, that when you're simplifying fractions, this is what it means. That if you have an answer that's an improper fraction, you cannot leave it as an improper fraction, and you have to change it either to a mixed number or a whole number. And then anytime you have a fraction for your answer, you have to look at it and make sure that it's reduced. If it's not reduced, you must reduce it. All right, now they give us 5 different examples, 5 different kinds of answers you can end up with when you are adding and subtracting fractions and mixed numbers. So let's take a look at those examples. We have 2/3 plus 2/3. Again, we have only been working with like denominators. That's still what we're doing, like denominators. Now we have 2/3 plus 2/3. So we know our answer is going to stay thirds because we have like denominators. We just simply keep that denominator. And then we have to add or subtract the numerators. So here we're adding 2 plus 2, which is 4. So that 2/3 plus 2/3 equals 4/3. Well, now take a look at that. What do you have? That's an improper fraction. Can't leave it as an improper fraction, so now we have to do that division. 4 divided by 3 would be 1. 1 times 3 equals 3, and then you have a remainder of 1. And remember that in your division, your remainder becomes the numerator and the denominator stays the same, 1 and 1/3. Now, if you're looking at that and wondering, well, how did I get that 1 and 1/3? Remember that your improper fraction is basically a division problem. So what do we have? We have 4 divided by 3. How many times does 3 go into 4? 1 time. 1 times 3 is 3. you subtract. What do you end up with? There's nothing else to bring down, so that 1 goes up on top, and that's your remainder. So you end up with 1 with a remainder of 1. How does that become a mixed number? Right. The first part of your quotient is your whole number. The remainder is always the numerator, and your denominator is always going to stay the same. Okay, your denominator was 3, so your denominator here is going to be 3. So 4 divided by 3 equals 1, with a remainder of 1, and then that denominator of 3. You keep that. So that's how you got that 1 1/3. So you don't leave your answer as an improper fraction. You have to change it out. Okay, so here 1 1/3. That's in its simplest form. This is a correct answer. It is not in its simplest form. Taking any kind of a test, you always lose points for not changing it into its simplest form. Okay, example 2, we have a subtraction problem. Okay, we're subtracting here 3/4 minus 1/4. Again, like denominators, so we know we have fourths, and then simply subtracting 3 minus 1 equals 2, 2/4. I take a look at that answer. 2/4, it's not an improper fraction, it's simply a fraction that I know I need to double check and make sure it's already reduced, and if it's not already reduced, you have to reduce. So 2/4, I can see that I can divide both the numerator and the denominator by 2, and that's what I do. 2 divided by 2 is 1, 4 divided by 2 equals 2. Of course, if you were paying attention, you realized 2/4, you had the numerator is half of the denominator, and any time the numerator is half of the denominator, that an equivalent fraction for that is 1/2. So 2/4 is equal to 1/2, and this is reduced. Can't reduce it further, so you're done. All right, so now we're going to we're adding mixed numbers here. The denominator is 3, so we know we're going to end up with the denominator of 3, but since it's a mixed number, we're going to add those whole numbers first. 3 plus 4 equals 7, and then 1 plus 2 equals 3, and our denominator is 3. 3 plus 4 equals 7, 1 plus 2 equals 3, the denominator stays 3. Okay, so now what we have is 7 3/3. What you have to notice is that we can't leave it that way. Why? Because 3/3 is a fraction name for 1. So now we have to say I have 7 whole plus 1 more means I have 8. So 7 3/3 is equal to 8. All right, the next one is 5 3/5 plus 6 4/5. It is adding, again, adding mixed numbers. We start by adding our whole numbers. 5 plus 6 equals 11. And then we're adding the fraction. 3 plus 4 equals 7. And 5 plus 5 equals 5. So now we have 11 7/5. Well, what you need to notice is that 7/5 is an improper fraction. So we're going to just hold off with this 11 for a minute. And now we need to change the 7/5 to a mixed number. So this is your division problem. 7 divided by 5. 7 divided by 5 equals 1. 1 times 5 equals 5. 7 minus 5 equals 2. That 2 becomes your remainder. So then you need to write this as a mixed number. So this is your whole number. Your remainder is your numerator, and the denominator stays the same, fifths. So 7/5 is equal to 1 2/5. Okay? 7/5 is equal to 1 2/5. But your answer is not 1 2/5. Remember, you had 11 7/5. So now you have to say, well, I had 11. The 7/5 is equal to 1 2/5. So now I have to combine these two and say 11 plus 1 is 12 2/5. So that 11 and 7/5, when you simplify it, is 12 and 2/5. And the reason for that is because that 7/5 is equal to 1 and 2/5. And so you're adding 11 plus 1 and 2/5 equals 12 and 2/5. Okay? And now we have the last example of the kind of answer you can end up with. We have a mixed number that we are subtracting. So 6 minus 1 equals 5. And then we have 5/8 minus 3/8, so we know we're keeping the eighths. And 5 minus 3 equals 2. 5 and 2/8. Okay, it is a regular mixed number. However, since it does contain a fraction, we need to look and make sure that fraction is reduced. 2/8 is not reduced, so we need to do that. But something that you need to keep in mind, when you have a mixed number as your answer and you're going to do the reducing, please carry over that whole number first, because lots of times people forget to rewrite that. You have to have that carried over as your answer. Don't just reduce the fraction, okay? You write the whole thing. So you carry over that whole number and then you reduce 2/8. What can you reduce 2/8 by? You can divide both the numerator and the denominator by 2. So that 2 divided by 2 equals 1. And 8 divided by 2 equals 4. And so we end up with 5 and 1/4. So we have reduced 5 and 2/8 to 5 and 1/4. But please remember, as I said, carry that whole number over, because often I'll get this, 5 and 2/8 equals 1/4. And that's really, that's incorrect. Because 5 and 2/8, this mixed number is not equal to 1/4. So you need to make sure that you're carrying over that whole number first and then reduce the fraction so that you end up with 5 and 1/4. Okay, so that's really important. And again, in this problem here, where we had this mixed number that also contained an improper fraction, and you've changed the improper fraction to a mixed number, you also need to make sure that you're adding it together, so that you're adding the 11 plus 1 equals 12, and then bring over your 2/5. Okay, that's where I see the biggest mistakes being made, is that when you have this and you have to simplify, how you then go about writing your answer. Okay, you have to make sure that you have all parts in there. Okay, make sure you have that whole number carried over. Make sure you've added onto the whole number that you had. All right, so this is lesson 132. All of the examples that I went through with you are all here on page 457. So you could go back, you can see those examples again. You could read the descriptions of how it's done so that you can review for yourself again what we did here together. Okay, and then you're working on lesson 132, numbers 1 to 25. Okay, let's just take a look at, let's just do like 2 of the practice problems together before you start to work on your own. Okay, so let's look at the practice. Okay, let's go with 5 and 1/4 plus 6 and 3/4. 5 and 1/4 plus 6 and 3/4. Okay, so we're adding mixed numbers. So we start by adding the whole numbers. 5 plus 6 equals 11. And then our fractions, again, we keep the fourths as our denominator, and 1 plus 3 equals 4. So you have 11 and 4/4. So you need to take a look at that and see, well, how do you need to simplify that? So you need to recognize that 4/4 is a fraction name for 1. And now you have 11 plus this 1, which is 12. So your final answer is actually 12, because 11 and 4/4 is the same as 12. All right, let's take a look at the subtraction next to it. 7 and 7/8 minus 1 and 1/8. Okay, So we have our whole numbers first. 7 minus 1 equals 6. Then we have eighths, so we keep the denominator of 8. And then we subtract the numerators. 7 minus 1 equals 6. So you end up with 6 and 6/8. And what you need to recognize here is that the 6/8 needs to be reduced. So before you do that, you bring over that whole number 6, and now you reduce the 6/8. Okay, what can we reduce the 6 and the 8 by? We can divide them both by 2. And 6 divided by 2 equals 3. And 8 divided by 2 equals 4. Okay, your final answer here would be 6 and 3/4. Just once again, always bring over that whole number first before you start looking to see how you want to reduce. Otherwise, you're going to forget to put it at the end. Okay? All right, so again, that's lesson 132. You're working on numbers 1 to 30, numbers 1 to 30. If you have any questions or you need any help with this, please don't hesitate to give me a call so I can help you out. All right, and then also make sure you spend a little extra time on extra math or IXL. All right, let me know if you need me to help you. Okay, talk to you later. Bye.